This is Edward Snowden. Back in 2013, his name was everywhere, hitting the world like a bombshell. He exposed the deepest secrets of the US government and fled. But where is he today? How does he live? And why has he been so silent lately? He has his reasons, and today we're going to tell you how fate played a truly cruel joke on him. First, let me remind you who Edward Snowden really was and why he took such a desperate step. Edward wasn't just some random tech geek or a disgruntled employee. His roots were deep in American history. His ancestors were actual heroes who fought in the Revolutionary War. For the Snowdens, serving the state was in their blood. His father served in the Coast Guard, his mother worked for the federal courts, and his grandfather was an admiral and a high-ranking FBI official. Edward grew up surrounded by people in uniform. He sincerely believed in his country's ideals and saw himself as a true patriot, duty-bound to protect the freedom of his people. By early 2013, Snowden's life looked like something out of a glossy magazine. He lived in sunny Hawaii, waking up every day to white sand, palm trees, and the endless ocean. He was a technical specialist for the NSA, the National Security Agency, one of the most secretive and powerful intelligence agencies in the world. Thanks to his brilliant mind, by age 29, he had achieved incredible success, earning about $200,000 a year. He had a big, cozy house, a nice car, and a girlfriend, Lindsay, with whom he planned a long and happy future. He had everything a person his age could dream of: wealth, status, and a life in a tropical paradise. But behind that beautiful facade was a grim reality that Edward saw every day at the office. His workspace wasn't on a sunny beach, it was in a secret underground bunker with no windows, which employees called the tunnel. There, under the cold glow of computer monitors, Edward had access to the deepest secrets of global surveillance. He was horrified to find that the US government was secretly collecting data on almost every person on the planet, including millions of its own citizens. Intelligence agencies could read any message and listen to any call. But the most disgusting part for Edward was the behavior of his colleagues. He saw young analysts sharing intimate, nude photos of regular people just for fun, laughing as they passed them around. To them, it was just entertainment, but for Edward, it was a profound ethical crisis. He realized that people's privacy was being destroyed just to satisfy the curiosity of guys in uniforms. The breaking point, the moment of no return, was an outright lie from the top brass. In March 2013, the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, testified under oath before the Senate. When asked point blank if the NSA collected data on millions of Americans, Clapper said no without blinking an eye. Edward watched the broadcast from his desk, feeling his blood boil at the injustice. He realized that if the government could lie so brazenly to its own people and the law, then democracy was in grave danger. That day, he finally decided he could no longer be part of this dishonest system. He knew the only way to change anything was to tell the world the truth, even if the price was too high. Edward began acting with extreme stealth and professionalism, secretly copying thousands of documents onto a tiny memory card. He knew that if he got caught, he'd spend the rest of his life in a maximum security prison, so he had to move fast. He lied at work, saying he needed medical leave, and didn't even dare tell the truth to his girlfriend to keep her out of trouble. He simply left Lindsay a note, grabbed his laptop, and flew to Hong Kong alone, abandoning his home and his perfect life forever. He arrived in Hong Kong terrified and exhausted, checking into a place called the Mira Hotel. He spent hours in his room, stuffing pillows under the door cracks and hiding under a blanket when typing passwords because he was afraid of hidden cameras and mics. In that tiny room, he met with journalists and handed over the proof that the world was living under total surveillance. At that moment, Edward Snowden became the most wanted man on Earth. After the secret files were published, the world became one giant hunting zone for Snowden. He needed to find a place where US intelligence couldn't reach him, so he set his sights on Latin America. Edward bought a ticket to Ecuador with a layover in Moscow, hoping it would be just a quick stop on his way to true freedom. But this is where fate prepared its first cruel surprise. While Snowden's plane was high in the sky, the US government canceled his passport. When he touched down at Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport, he was horrified to find out he was a man without a country. He couldn't buy a ticket to fly out, but he wasn't allowed to enter the city either. It was the perfect trap, created by his own country. By trying to catch their fugitive, US authorities basically locked him right in the arms of their biggest geopolitical rival. However, there is a much darker side to this story. Many people ask, was this accidental trip to Moscow really an accident? A well-known American analyst, Mark Thiessen, has a very harsh theory. He reminds us that among the documents Snowden stole were top-secret reports about how US intelligence successfully intercepted the communications of then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev at the G20 summit in London. By leaking this data, Snowden essentially handed Moscow a map of all of the holes in their security system. Thiessen is convinced that this blinded US intelligence. He believes that because of Snowden's leaks, Russia was able to change its communication methods and prepare for the 2014 invasion of Crimea so secretly that US agencies never saw it coming. It turns out that even before getting a Russian passport, Snowden had already done Moscow a massive favor, causing huge damage to the security of his own homeland. The next 39 days were a living nightmare for Edward. He lived in the airport's transit zone, sleeping on benches in waiting areas and eating fast food while being constantly watched by security cameras and journalists. He desperately sent asylum requests to dozens of countries, but almost all of Europe closed its doors under pressure from Washington. Perhaps the most humiliating moment was the incident with the president of Bolivia, Evo Morales. His plane was forced to land in Austria just because the US suspected Snowden might be on board. Edward realized the world had become too small for him, and the only place that wasn't afraid to defy America and keep him safe was Russia. Finally, Snowden walked out of the airport with a temporary asylum document, but it was a bitter victory. Later, in his memoirs, he would write a very sad and accurate line: "Exile is an endless layover." Those words capture the tragedy of his situation. He hoped to be a free hero who changed the world, but instead he became a hostage of circumstances in a country he never even chose. When Edward Snowden finally left Sheremetyevo Airport in August 2013, he likely hoped his time in Russia would be nothing more than a temporary layover, but reality proved far more complicated. Initially granted asylum for just 1 year, his stay was repeatedly extended until he received a 3-year residency permit in 2014. Around that same time, his girlfriend Lindsay Mills joined him, and they began trying to build some semblance of a normal life in a foreign land. In 2017, they secretly married in a Moscow registry office, and they later had 2 sons who became Russian citizens by birth. Edward deeply cherished his family and feared being separated from them. Because of this, he obtained permanent residency in 2020, and in September 2022, Vladimir Putin signed a decree officially granting him Russian citizenship. A question many people ask is, how does a man hunted by every intelligence agency on Earth actually pay the bills? He can't exactly post his resume on LinkedIn. In reality, Snowden has become a digital ghost. From the very start of his journey in Russia, he landed a job at one of the country's largest local IT firms, a name that remains a closely guarded secret to this day. Word is he works as a technical expert, helping maintain major internet platforms. However, his real money didn't come from a programmer's salary, but from his past global fame. For years, Edward spoke at international conferences via video link, earning massive fees, sometimes $30,000 to $50,000 for a single lecture. Without ever leaving his Moscow apartment, he managed to earn millions of dollars. On top of that, his memoir Permanent Record became a global bestseller. Although the US government sued to ensure all profits from the book went to the US Treasury, Snowden managed to secure a multi-million-dollar advance before the legal battles even began. In those difficult early years, he was also saved by cryptocurrency. Supporters from around the world sent him bitcoins, which skyrocketed in value over time. Financially, Edward is very well off. But therein lies the ultimate irony of his life. You can have millions in crypto and dollars in your accounts, but you're forced to spend them in the local supermarkets of Lyubertsy, a gritty Moscow suburb, standing in line for bread next to pensioners and blue-collar workers. Your knowledge is worth a fortune, but you still haven't been able to buy real freedom or the right to say what you actually think. Interestingly, during his first few years in Russia, Snowden still tried to be that same fighter for truth, openly criticizing the local authorities on Twitter. For instance, in 2016, when the Yarovaya law, a massive surveillance package, was passed, Edward didn't stay silent. He wrote, Putin has signed a repressive new law that violates not only human rights, but common sense. It's a dark day for Russia. Later, in 2019, when protests in Moscow were being violently suppressed, he spoke out again, stating that the campaign of repression against peaceful citizens must end, as the right to stand against injustice is guaranteed by Article 31 of the Russian Constitution and is inalienable for every person. In those years, he still believed he could be an independent critic while living under the Kremlin's wing, but the political climate was shifting far too fast. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, Snowden was already in Moscow, but the true nightmare began in 2022, leading up to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In a twist of irony, just before the war started, Edward mocked US intelligence warnings, calling them a disinformation campaign. However, once the troops actually crossed the border, he was forced to explain himself to his followers. He wrote, "Russia should not invade Ukraine," but added that he saw no point in constantly shouting about it, as empty slogans don't solve problems. From that moment on, his Twitter feed went quiet or filled up with generic tech talk, and any criticism of the Russian authorities completely vanished from his posts. The former rebel fell silent, realizing that in the new reality of the 2020s, a single careless word in Russia could cost you everything. One of the most cynical chapters of this story was the mobilization. When the draft was announced in Russia in 2022, many wondered what would happen to the new citizen, Snowden. After all, he had just received his Russian passport. His lawyer quickly calmed the public, stating that Edward was not eligible for the draft because he had never served in the Russian army and had no military experience. This is the essence of Snowden's life now. He is officially one of them, a Russian citizen, yet he remains special. He lives in a country where thousands of men were sent to the front, while he remains safely protected by his status as a valuable guest. It's a privilege that the average resident of Lyubertsy can only dream of. The final, most mundane chord of this story came in 2025, when journalists from the Sistema project uncovered a shocking detail about his daily life. It turned out that the great whistleblower of NSA secrets is now officially a tax resident of Lyubertsy, a suburb of Moscow. His tax ID, INN, begins with the numbers 5027, which ties him directly to the local tax office. Journalists even found photos on his wife's Instagram taken against the backdrop of typical Lyubertsy high-rises and playgrounds. Just imagine the contrast. A man who once had access to the planet's deepest secrets and lived in a tropical paradise in Hawaii is now registered in a nondescript suburban town, paying taxes to the local budget and living in a standard gray apartment block. Fate played a cruel joke on him, turning him from a symbol of global freedom into an ordinary Lyubertsy taxpayer who is forced to stay silent just to keep living his quiet family life. Now, let's take a look at the digital reality Edward Snowden faces today in 2026. This place is now often called the digital gulag, and the irony is overwhelming. Remember how Edward fled the US because he didn't want the government secretly collecting his phone data? Well, compared to modern-day Russia, the NSA's methods back in 2013 look like child's play. Today, the Western internet in Russia is a scorched wasteland. YouTube, where you used to watch everything from cartoons to political debates, is officially banned. Meta, the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, is labeled an extremist organization. Just think about that. The same Instagram where you post pie recipes or vacation photos is considered as dangerous and illegal as a terrorist group. To access these sites, people have to use VPNs, but hundreds of VPN services are being blocked every single day. There is a striking fact that adds even more drama to this story. Edward Snowden isn't just a former tech guy. Since 2016, he has officially served as the president of the Freedom of the Press Foundation. This organization is based in California and works to protect journalists worldwide from government spying and pressure. Snowden's foundation carefully tracks every violation in the US. If a journalist is blocked from a briefing or has their laptop searched, Edward immediately writes angry posts demanding justice. But look at the monstrous paradox. The man who leads a global foundation to protect the press lives in a country where, since the war began, free media has practically ceased to exist. In the Russia of 2026, independent journalism is essentially a crime. Forget about critical articles or investigations. For any word the government dislikes, a journalist faces up to 15 years in prison under fake news laws. The biggest outlets are closed, their websites are blocked, and the authors are either in exile or behind bars. This is where the joke of fate becomes truly cruel. The president of the Freedom of the Press Foundation lives in the heart of a country where the press was destroyed right in front of him. You won't find a single statement from him about the raid on Novaya Gazeta or the shutdown of the last independent news sites. Snowden, who calls on citizens in Denmark or France to fight for information freedom, cannot say a single word about what is happening in his own backyard in Lyubertsy. It looks like a scene from a very sad movie. Snowden sits in his Moscow apartment discussing journalist rights in Ohio via video call, while right outside his window, the last local reporter is being arrested for a social media post. He is the world's chief defender of journalists, yet he cannot protect a single journalist in the country of his new citizenship. Edward Snowden also faces major communication problems in his new home. It's becoming harder for the great whistleblower to give paid lectures to Western audiences from Russia because his new homeland is blocking the world's most popular apps. First, they outlawed WhatsApp, then Telegram, which was incredibly popular in Russia. Viber, Discord, Snapchat, Skype, Microsoft Teams, and WeChat are all restricted. Calls inside these apps constantly drop or fail. Even a VPN barely helps. In 2026, Russians faced massive mobile internet blackouts in many regions. Imagine leaving your house and being unable to pay with your phone, call a taxi, or even open Google Maps to find a street. Today, this sounds insane, but many Russians are already living through it. There are rumors that the Russian internet will soon become sovereign, meaning it will be totally cut off from the rest of the world. If that happens, Snowden won't even be able to video call his parents in the US, let alone give online lectures. As an alternative, the Russian government created a state-mandated messenger called Max. The authorities are pushing it hard. Stores are forced to install Max on all new phones before they are sold. Schools force parents and teachers to move all their chats there. Even officials who used to love Telegram are panicking because the block on regular calls hit them hard right in the middle of an election campaign. Why are people so afraid of this Max app? Because its installation requirements are terrifying for any security expert. The messenger wants to know everything. It asks for 24/7 access to your camera, microphone, and all your files. Russians fear the program is secretly recording everything in the room and sending the data straight to the police. Experts suggest using the web version in a browser instead of the app, but even that doesn't solve the main problem. There is zero anonymity in Max. The app is permanently linked to your phone number and your passport. Everything you write, like, or say is analyzed by AI and stored forever. Any word can be used against you in court, and the authorities don't even hide it. Just imagine, Edward Snowden, who fought so hard for online anonymity, is now forced to use a messenger that sends his data directly to the FSB. His children, who are now Russian citizens, will have to chat with their teachers through Max under the total control of the state. They can't refuse. Refusal means disciplinary action. The app is mandatory for all schools and government workers. Soon, Russians might not even be able to withdraw money from an ATM without confirming it through Max. The totalitarian state demands total control. But that's not all. Because of the long war, digital surveillance has moved onto the streets. Phone checks at Russian airports are now a common occurrence. Border guards can demand your password to look at your photo gallery or read your private chats. Even worse, police patrols in big cities can stop you and ask to see your phone. People are terrified. They wipe their chats and delete apps before leaving the house because having the wrong channel in your subscriptions can lead to a trip to the police station or a criminal case. In Russia today, if you refuse to show your phone to an officer, you can be detained for 48 hours. And don't forget, in Russian police stations, enhanced interrogations and torture are common. People are forced to confess to things they never did. All these bans and the long war have made Russians very angry. Many people, especially those who work online, are migrating abroad. Since 2022, between 1 and 2 million people have left the country. Meanwhile, those who stay are afraid to speak out because they live in fear. In modern Russia, you can go to prison for a single like or a comment. And where is our great fighter for freedom, Edward Snowden, during all this? Does he speak out against it? No. He remains submissively silent, accepting his situation just like everyone else. In America, he could say what he thought and leak state secrets. The justice system would have punished him, of course, but it would have been according to the laws of a democratic society. But in Russia? In his new homeland, traitors are dealt with much more brutally. Snowden is silent because he knows. If he opens his mouth, he won't just go to prison, he will disappear. It is well known how the Kremlin handles its opponents: poison, staged suicides, or Novichok. It doesn't matter if you are in Russia or abroad. So now, Snowden, the man who once sacrificed his career and his life in Hawaii to protect people from the all-seeing eye of the state, lives inside an even scarier system. He lives in a country where street phone checks are the norm, and using a bugged state messenger is mandatory. Snowden knows that in today's Russia, the right to private communication is dead. If he tries to expose the local surveillance system, he will be crushed. The world's greatest defender of privacy is trapped in the world's most obvious digital prison, paying taxes in Lubertsi and pretending nothing is wrong. When journalists asked him in 2023 if he regretted his choice, he said, "I have no regrets." But we can all imagine how much pain is hidden behind those words. He simply has no way back. The saddest part now is the massive gap between Edward's words and his reality. When he received his passport, he said he wanted to raise his children according to American values, including freedom of speech. But how is that even possible in the Russia of 2026? What values of freedom can he talk about with his sons when outside their apartment in the Moscow suburbs, the internet is cut by censorship, and you can go to prison for 15 years just for a wrong social media post? Snowden is trapped. He has to teach his children to be free, but at the same time, he has to teach them to stay silent so their dad isn't extradited to the US or thrown into a Russian jail. So, what conclusions can we draw from this story? First, Snowden clearly showed that one person really can expose the rot of an entire system. Thanks to him, we learned how intelligence agencies actually work. But his example also proved that this truth comes with a sky-high price. He wanted to break down the walls of the digital concentration camp, but in the end, he just moved from one section of it to another, where the rules are much tougher and the guards are meaner. Second, Snowden's fate is a warning to all idealists. Edward believed in principles and truth, but in the world of big politics, his truth became nothing more than a bargaining chip. Russia didn't give him a home out of love for free speech. They did it to poke a finger in America's eye. And now, when Russia has built its own surveillance system that surpasses the NSA, Snowden is forced to be a quiet taxpayer from Lubertsi, because no one else on this planet is waiting for him. Today, Snowden is the symbol of a lost battle for privacy. I want to end this story with the one question that has no answer. If back then in Hawaii, Edward Snowden could have looked into the year 2026 and seen himself, a citizen of a country at war, a user of the Max Messenger, a man who is afraid to say a single extra word just to protect his family, would he have still hit send on those secret files? Or would he have preferred to remain an ordinary IT guy, drinking coffee by the ocean and pretending that surveillance didn't exist? Let me know in the comments what you think about this. Who do you consider Snowden to be today? A hero, a traitor, or just a man who made a fatal mistake? Don't forget to subscribe. There is a lot more interesting content coming up. Thanks for watching.